Across YouTube, one extraordinary claim refuses to disappear. Some say the Ethiopian Bible contains a forgotten account of something buried beneath Antarctica, something so significant that it has been hidden from the world for centuries. According to these stories, the frozen continent conceals the prison of the fallen angels, the remains of an ancient civilization, or even evidence that could change everything we know about biblical history. It's a captivating idea, and millions of people have watched videos repeating it. But where did this story actually come from? More importantly, does the Ethiopian Bible really say any of it? To answer that question, we didn't start with social media posts or modern theories. Instead, we went back to the oldest surviving manuscripts, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the ancient Book of Enoch, and the remarkable biblical tradition that has been preserved in Ethiopia for generations. What we discovered was completely unexpected. The ancient text does describe imprisoned heavenly beings. It does speak of darkness, judgment, hidden valleys, and a place prepared for those who rebelled against God. But does it describe Antarctica? Or has a modern mystery become attached to an ancient book that was already mysterious enough on its own? Tonight, we're separating the manuscripts from the myths, following the evidence wherever it leads, and uncovering a story that is far more fascinating than the internet legend itself. Because sometimes, the greatest mystery isn't the one buried beneath the ice. It's the one hiding in plain sight inside a book that most of the world stopped reading centuries ago. Before we begin, if you enjoy documentaries that explore ancient texts, forgotten history, and biblical mysteries through careful research rather than sensational claims, consider subscribing to the Ninth Tablet. We publish in-depth investigations like this regularly, and your support helps us continue uncovering these remarkable stories. Long before debates about Antarctica, hidden civilizations, or mysterious prisons beneath the earth, there was a much older mystery, one that began with a single ancient book. It's called the Book of Enoch. For many people today, the name itself raises questions. Some have never heard of it. Others know it only as a lost or forbidden book. And then there are those who believe it contains secrets deliberately hidden from the world. But the truth is both simpler and far more fascinating. The Book of Enoch was never completely lost. Nor was it universally banned. In fact, while most of the Christian world eventually stopped including it in their biblical canon, one ancient church preserved it, copied it, read it, and treated it as scripture for centuries. That church was the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. To this day, the Book of Enoch remains part of its Old Testament, making Ethiopia the only major Christian tradition to preserve the complete text as canonical scripture. That alone makes the book extraordinary. But its story becomes even more remarkable when we ask another question. If Europe forgot it, how did Ethiopia preserve it? The answer begins thousands of years before modern nations existed, during a period scholars call Second Temple Judaism. This was an age of political upheaval, foreign empires, and intense religious reflection. Jewish writers weren't only recording history, they were trying to understand why evil existed, why suffering continued, and what role unseen spiritual beings played in the story of humanity. It was in this environment that the earliest sections of the Book of Enoch were written. Although the book is attributed to Enoch, the seventh generation from Adam mentioned briefly in Genesis, modern scholars agree that the text itself was composed centuries later by anonymous Jewish writers who wrote in Enoch's name, a common literary practice in the ancient world. That doesn't diminish its historical importance. In fact, it makes the book even more valuable for understanding how many Jews before the time of Jesus interpreted Scripture. For centuries, some critics assumed the Book of Enoch was a late invention. Then, everything changed. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd searching for a lost goat made one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in modern history. Hidden inside caves overlooking the Dead Sea were thousands of ancient manuscript fragments, what we now call the Dead Sea Scrolls. Among those fragile scrolls were multiple Aramaic fragments of the Book of Enoch. That discovery transformed the conversation overnight. Suddenly, scholars had physical evidence proving that large portions of Enoch existed centuries before the birth of Christ. The book was no medieval legend. It was genuinely ancient. Even more surprising, the New Testament itself appears to recognize its influence. In the Epistle of Jude, we find a direct quotation from a prophecy attributed to Enoch, a remarkable detail that has sparked discussion among biblical scholars for generations. That doesn't automatically settle debates about whether the entire book should be considered scripture. But it does show something important. The writers of the New Testament knew this book. They read it. And at least one New Testament author considered part of it worthy of quotation. So if the Book of Enoch was known among early believers, if fragments of it were preserved with the Dead Sea Scrolls, and if one Christian tradition continued reading it for nearly 2,000 years, why did it disappear from most Bibles? That question would shape Christian history for centuries. And before we can understand the mysterious prison described later in Enoch, we first need to understand how one of the most influential books of the ancient world slowly faded from the Western biblical tradition while remaining alive in Ethiopia. Because sometimes, the greatest mystery isn't what a book contains. It's why so many people stopped reading it. Before we continue, I'd love to hear from you. Had you heard of the Book of Enoch before today, or is this your first introduction to it? Let me know in the comments, and if you're watching from somewhere outside Ethiopia, tell us where you're joining from. It's always fascinating to see how far these ancient stories continue to travel. Long before the flood covered the earth. Before Noah built the ark. Before humanity faced one of the greatest judgments recorded in Scripture. The Book of Enoch tells a story that begins on the slopes of a mountain. Its name was Mount Hermon. Standing at the northern edge of ancient Israel, Mount Hermon rises above the surrounding landscape like a silent witness to history. Snow often crowns its highest peaks, and for thousands of years it has marked the boundary between kingdoms, cultures, and civilizations. But according to the Book of Enoch, it was also the place where heaven and earth collided. The story begins with a group of heavenly beings known as the Watchers. Unlike the brief account in Genesis, which simply mentions that the sons of God, taking wives from among the daughters of men, the Book of Enoch expands the story dramatically, describing 200 Watchers who descended together under the leadership of a figure named Semjaza. Before they left heaven, the book says they made a solemn oath. Each feared the consequences of rebellion, so they bound themselves together with a curse, promising that none would turn back. It was a decision that would change the course of human history. According to Enoch, these beings did more than take human wives. They crossed a boundary established by God, entering a relationship between the heavenly and the earthly that the text presents as a direct act of rebellion. The result, Enoch says, was the birth of the Nephilim, giants whose violence filled the earth with bloodshed. But that wasn't the only consequence. The Watchers also became teachers. Not of wisdom in the biblical sense, but of knowledge humanity was never meant to possess. One figure, Azazel, is said to have taught the making of weapons, swords, shields, and armor. Others introduced astrology, enchantments, sorcery, cosmetics, precious stones, and forms of hidden knowledge that, according to the text, corrupted both humanity and creation itself. Whether modern readers interpret these descriptions literally, symbolically, or somewhere in between, the message of the Book of Enoch is unmistakable. Human corruption did not happen by accident. It was accelerated by a rebellion that began in the heavenly realm. As violence spread across the earth, the cries of humanity rose before God. In response, the book describes 4 archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, looking upon the devastation and appealing to the Most High for justice. The answer they received would become one of the most dramatic judgments in all of ancient Jewish literature. The Watchers would not simply be defeated. They would be imprisoned. Not forever, but until the appointed day of judgment. Where that prison was, and how the Book of Enoch describes it, is where our investigation truly begins. This story has been interpreted in different ways for centuries. Some read it as literal history, while others see it as symbolic or apocalyptic literature. Which view do you find most convincing? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. When the cries of humanity reached heaven, the Book of Enoch describes a divine response unlike anything found in the brief account of Genesis. Judgment would come. But before the flood washed over the earth, the rebellion of the Watchers had to be dealt with first. According to the Book of Enoch, God gave specific instructions to the archangels, assigning each a different task. Raphael was commanded to deal with Azazel. Gabriel was sent against the violent offspring of the Watchers. Michael confronted Semjaza and the leaders of the rebellion. Each judgment was different, but together they formed a single message. The rebellion would not go unpunished. One passage, preserved in the ancient manuscripts, stands at the center of this entire mystery. Raphael is instructed to bind Azazel, cast him into darkness, and place him in a desolate location among rough and jagged rocks until the day of judgment. Notice what the text actually says. It speaks of darkness. It speaks of binding. It speaks of rocks. It speaks of a desolate place. But it says nothing about Antarctica. That distinction matters. As the narrative continues, the remaining Watchers are also bound, awaiting their final judgment. The language becomes increasingly dramatic, describing hidden valleys, the depths of the earth, and places prepared specifically for those who abandoned their heavenly position. To ancient readers, this wasn't a geographical map. It was a picture of divine justice. The language is rich with symbolism, yet it also reflects ideas that appear elsewhere in Jewish and early Christian writings. Centuries later, the Epistle of Jude would speak of angels who did not keep their own position, but were kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. 2 Peter uses different language, describing rebellious angels being cast into Tartarus, a Greek term associated with a place of imprisonment and judgment. Although these books use different vocabulary, the central theme remains remarkably consistent. Rebellion. Judgment. Imprisonment. Waiting. This consistency has led many scholars to conclude that the authors of Jude and 2 Peter were familiar with traditions found in the Book of Enoch, even if they did not treat every part of the book in exactly the same way. But another question soon emerged. If these imprisoned beings were described as being in darkness, beneath the earth, or within hidden valleys, where did people imagine that place to be? Ancient Jewish readers generally understood these descriptions within their own worldview. They pictured a cosmic prison, a realm of confinement beyond ordinary human reach, not a location that could be marked on a map. Modern readers, however, often ask different questions. Instead of asking what these passages meant to their original audience, they ask where such a prison might exist today. And that shift in perspective would eventually give birth to one of the internet's most enduring theories. Could the prison described in Enoch still exist somewhere on Earth? And if so, why do so many people believe that somewhere is Antarctica? Before we investigate that claim, we need to understand how ancient people viewed the world itself. Because without understanding their worldview, it's easy to misunderstand their words. If you're enjoying this investigation so far, take a moment to leave a like. It tells YouTube that documentaries built on careful research are worth recommending, and it helps more people discover content like this. By this point, one thing is already clear. The Book of Enoch describes a place of confinement. A place of darkness. A place of waiting. A prison prepared for the watchers until the final judgment. But to understand what the author intended, we have to leave behind modern maps and step into the world of ancient Jewish thought. When the earliest readers encountered words like the depths of the earth, hidden valleys, or gloomy darkness, they weren't imagining a location that explorers might one day discover with satellites or polar expeditions. They were describing a reality that belonged to God's unseen order. The universe, as many Jews of the Second Temple period understood it, was divided into distinct realms. There were the heavens above. The earth where humanity lived. And beneath it all was the realm of the dead and the place of divine judgment, a mysterious domain that could not be reached by ordinary human travel. The Book of Enoch reflects that worldview. Its language isn't trying to provide geographical coordinates. It's communicating separation. The watchers had separated themselves from God's authority. Now they would be separated from creation itself. This same pattern appears throughout ancient Jewish literature. In the Book of Jubilees, another text preserved in the Ethiopian biblical tradition, the rebellion of the watchers is remembered alongside God's judgment upon them. In the New Testament, Jude speaks of angels kept in chains until judgment. 2 Peter describes them as being cast into Tartarus. Different words. Different audiences. Yet the same central idea. The prison is not presented as a destination for curious explorers. It is presented as a place beyond human reach. That is why, for nearly 2,000 years, Jewish commentators, early Christians, and the Church Fathers discussed these passages without suggesting a hidden location somewhere on the earth's surface. No one pointed to a mountain. No one identified a desert. And certainly no one mentioned Antarctica, a continent that remained unknown to the ancient world. So when did people begin connecting Enoch's prison with the frozen South? Surprisingly, that idea is not ancient at all. Its origins can be traced to the modern era, where ancient texts, conspiracy theories, unexplained discoveries, and internet speculation gradually merged into one compelling story. To understand how that happened, we have to leave the ancient world behind and enter the age of viral mysteries. If you've made it this far, thank you for joining me on this journey. These investigations take weeks of research, and your support makes them possible. If you're enjoying the documentary, consider sharing it with someone who enjoys biblical history and ancient mysteries. If you've spent any time exploring biblical mysteries online, you've almost certainly encountered the claim. Some videos insist that the Book of Enoch reveals something buried beneath Antarctica. Others suggest the imprisoned watchers remain trapped beneath miles of ice, waiting for the appointed time described in Scripture. The theory has spread so widely that many people now assume it's actually written in the Ethiopian Bible. But here's the surprising part. It isn't. Not a single surviving manuscript of the Book of Enoch mentions Antarctica. Not the Guizi manuscripts preserved in Ethiopia. Not the Greek fragments. not the Aramaic copies discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls. None of them identify the prison of the Watchers with a frozen continent at the bottom of the world. So, where did the idea come from? The answer isn't found in one ancient book. It's the result of several different stories gradually merging together over the last century. The first ingredient was the genuine mystery surrounding the Book of Enoch itself. Because Enoch speaks about imprisoned angels, hidden places, and divine judgment, readers naturally began asking whether those descriptions referred to a real location. The second ingredient came from Antarctica. Few places on Earth capture the imagination quite like the southern continent. Its endless ice fields, towering mountains hidden beneath glaciers, subglacial lakes, and unexplored landscapes have inspired decades of speculation. For many people, Antarctica became the perfect setting for ancient secrets. Then came a third influence. Books, documentaries, and television programs about ancient astronauts, lost civilizations, and forbidden archaeology became increasingly popular during the late 20th century. Ideas from completely different subjects began blending together. The Watchers from Enoch. The Nephilim. The Anunnaki of Mesopotamia. Atlantis. Area 51. Antarctica. Although these subjects originated from entirely different traditions, they were often presented as though they described one continuous hidden history. The Internet accelerated that process. A theory repeated often enough can begin to feel ancient, even when its origins are surprisingly modern. By the early days of YouTube, dramatic thumbnails showing frozen angels, underground cities, and hidden biblical secrets attracted millions of viewers. Some creators genuinely believed the theory. Others simply discovered that it generated clicks. But popularity is not the same as evidence. When historians examine a claim, they ask a different question. Can it be traced back to the earliest sources? In this case, the answer is no. The earliest manuscripts consistently describe imprisonment, darkness, rocky places, hidden valleys, and divine judgment. They never identify Antarctica. That doesn't make the Book of Enoch less fascinating. If anything, it makes its real history even more remarkable. Because the greatest mystery was never hidden beneath the ice. It was hidden in plain sight. Inside one of the most influential ancient books ever written. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you think ancient texts should always be interpreted literally, or is it important to understand them within the historical world in which they were written? Share your perspective in the comments. Respectful discussion is always welcome here. After following this story from the mountains of ancient Israel, through the deserts of the Dead Sea, into the churches of Ethiopia, and finally across the frozen landscape of Antarctica, we arrive at one unavoidable conclusion. The Book of Enoch is real. Its influence on ancient Judaism is undeniable. Fragments of it were preserved among the Dead Sea Scrolls, confirming that much of the book existed centuries before the birth of Christ. Its themes echo throughout Second Temple Judaism. One of its prophecies is even quoted directly in the New Testament. Whatever one's view of its authority, its historical importance is beyond dispute. The Watchers are also real. At least as literary figures within the Book of Enoch. Their rebellion forms one of the central themes of the text, offering an expanded explanation for the brief account found in Genesis chapter 6. The imprisonment of those Watchers is equally clear. The manuscripts consistently describe confinement, darkness, hidden places, judgment, waiting. Those ideas appear repeatedly throughout the ancient text and are reflected in related passages such as Jude and 2 Peter. But when we ask a different question, whether the Book of Enoch identifies that prison as Antarctica, the evidence changes. The surviving manuscripts simply do not say that. Not the Aramaic fragments. Not the Greek copies. Not the Guizi manuscripts preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The connection between Antarctica and the prison of the Watchers is a modern theory. It grew over time as genuine biblical traditions became intertwined with speculation about unexplored continents, lost civilizations, and hidden knowledge. For some people, that theory remains fascinating. For others, it goes far beyond what the evidence supports. As historians, researchers, and readers, our responsibility is not to make ancient texts more mysterious than they already are. It is to understand them as faithfully as possible. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson this journey offers. Sometimes the truth isn't less interesting than the legend. Sometimes it's even more extraordinary. A book written more than 2,000 years ago survived when countless others disappeared. It traveled across languages, kingdoms, and generations. It shaped religious thought. It influenced writers of the New Testament. And it continues to spark conversations that bridge archaeology, history, theology, and human curiosity. Whether you see the Book of Enoch as inspired scripture, valuable ancient literature, or simply an important historical document, its story reminds us of something profound. The search for truth is rarely simple. It demands patience, evidence, humility, and the willingness to follow the facts, even when they lead somewhere we didn't expect. Perhaps that's why the Book of Enoch still captivates people today. Not because it answers every mystery, but because it invites us to keep asking better questions. And maybe that's exactly what the ancient author hoped we would do. If you enjoyed this investigation and want more documentaries that explore ancient texts, forgotten history, and biblical mysteries through careful research, subscribe to the Ninth Tablet. Every episode begins with the oldest available evidence and follows it wherever it leads. If there's another ancient mystery you'd like us to investigate, leave it in the comments below. Your suggestion might become our next documentary. And if you found this journey valuable, consider sharing it with someone who enjoys history, archaeology, or biblical studies. Until next time, keep searching, keep questioning, and never stop pursuing the truth.